Shaka, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Ah, man, it's my pleasure. I got to be honest. When I was released in 2013
Mhm.
and kind of went to work on Google, like who's out there, who's making a difference, who's doing things. First thing I came across was your TED Talk.
Oh, wow.
It's a true story, and
Yeah.
the line that and I'll have you expound on it. I'll probably butcher it, but the line that has always stuck with me was something to the effect of, "You're not the sum of your worst things that you've ever done."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought that was really important. We live in a society today where cancel culture is a real thing, and we really try to throw people away. And as you know, when you go into that environment and being in prison, you meet people that's at a different space in their journey than they were when they got arrested.
Mm,
And also for me, it was really understanding how did so many of us end up in that environment in the first place.
yeah.
And I wanted to challenge people on the idea of defining people by a singular moment or a series of moments that was rooted in their worst, where they were at that point in their life, right? The trauma, the pain, the addiction, or whatever the things were. And it just, really troubled my spirit that we were so quick to disregard human beings as not being redeemable. And I knew that couldn't be further from the truth. And I wanted to really challenge the world on that.
I love everything about that. When when I was inside, I had the opportunity to teach off the yard every day, and I would teach based on my background in history. I would teach business and entrepreneurship courses to four different yards that came to this community college,
Wow.
and um, I started this thing, and it just kind of popped into my head one day, and I said, "The word felon is just a noun."
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so when you start to put an adjective in front of that noun, long hair, black hair, short hair, blonde hair, no hair, it starts to give some feeling.
Mm,
And so I told them then, I said, no, I want us all to be accomplished.
yeah.
And that's really where, my nonprofit Accomplished Ventures had come from. And so I thought there's so much to this mindset. Like you said, like we believe, whether it's cancel culture, whether it's social media, whether it's traumas, we believe that one thing that we do or have done could should define us for the rest of our life. And it shouldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah.
my question is, like, how do we overcome that? How do we when you do get out, you do have some barriers for real.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with these type of conversations, right? And I think back to that TED talk. Before that talk in 2014, I want to say, like, no one who had been actually convicted of a crime had, been invited to such a massive platform and such an influential platform. And, even now, many years later, I marvel at like where I was at that point in my life. That whole, experience was surreal on so many different levels. And it was such a challenge. But what I felt, instinctively was like, hey, I'm gonna put this out here. I'm gonna share my story in a way that hopefully compels people to take a closer look and to begin to examine what's actually happening in our prison system
Mm,
and to recognize that the prison system fails if we return to society the same way that we went in. And I think it's those conversations that's really begin to expand the narrative. I don't like to say shift the narrative because I don't think that's quite honest. I think
mm,
oftentimes, we want to change the narrative, we want to shift the narrative, and the reality is, a lot of the narrative is true, but it's not all of the truth. And so I really thought it was important to really expand the narrative to include all of what I know to be true. And, I think we're getting to a place where we're having more honest conversations, but we have so far to go. And especially when you think about, criminal justice reform, because so much of it is tied to politics. It's tied to politics, it's tied to trauma that's rooted in communities, it's tied to fear, it's tied to recidivism, those who get out and go back without anybody really exploring the context of why they went back. And
mm.
so it makes it for a very tough conversation. But I think we're at a space now where some of the harder work has been done. You know, there's tons of us in the space who have shared our personal stories, who have, you know, invited people to come with us inside of prisons and jails, and have given people an opportunity to meet people in that environment that is consistently blowing their mind when they realize these were kids going in, or
Yeah.
these were people who, you know, their trauma journey started so early on in life that the outcomes of them being in prison was as clear as day. You know, when you really watch what happens to human beings as they begin to unravel, given their circumstances. And I think it's just a continuation of that process of telling more stories, us being empowered to tell our stories, which oftentimes isn't the case. Everybody wants to tell our stories, but a lot of times they don't really want to invite us into the space to tell our own stories. And fortunately, as a writer, I've been, you know, in a position to articulate my experience without asking permission first.
I love that. And so many books that you've written, and I think they're great. We'll get into them. But one of the things I want you to tell the story about is talk about selling crack
Yeah.
on the parole in the parole parking lot.
Yeah, so to
Yeah.
clarify for your audience,
Yep.
it wasn't like crack cocaine.
Yep.
You know, I started off my journey as a writer, actually writing fiction, which a lot of people they really aren't aware of because that was so early into my homecoming. And you know, I believe, and I know you get this, you know, as an entrepreneur, as someone investing in other entrepreneurs, you know, you have to be in it. You know, you have to make a
Yeah.
full on commitment, and you know, you can't afford to lose moments and opportunities to make a sale. Like I'm a salesman at the core of my being. And for me, it was, you know, start the way I want to finish.
Mm,
And I knew getting out of prison, if I was going to go on this journey as a writer and as an entrepreneur, that I had to start as soon as my feet touched free soil. And so the day I was released, you know, they released me from prison. They put us in a van. They shuffled us over to the parole office. And I remember going in the parole office and waiting to, you know, hear from my agent or meet my agent. And I didn't even know I could just walk outside into the parking lot because I still had those mental restrictions
yeah.
in mind. But once I saw my, you know, parole officer kind of got, you know, all the information in regards to what I was responsible for, I had met this guy named Prince Montgomery, and we had met like shortly before we both were paroled, and he was getting paroled that day as well. And I told him what I was coming to do. I was like, man, I'm getting out. You know, my goal is to sell books. My partner at that time, you know, I had her bring the books that I had got printed up, you know, while I was in prison, bring them with her when she came to pick me up. And I just remember Prince saying to me, like, man, I really want to support you. And he didn't have much, you know, he had his come home money, whatever that was. And he was like, you know, I want to buy a book. And, you know, I was like, I got you, you know. So, you know, she popped the trunk, you know, and I got the book out. The books I was selling them for $15. He had a $20 bill. I'm like, bro, I ain't got change. I ain't even got no money right now, you know. And he was like, don't worry about it, man. Keep the extra five.
Mm,
But I'm excited to support you on that journey. And it's one of my favorite coming home pictures that I have in my portfolio of pictures that I took when I got out. And it's my favorite for a few reasons. It was the first time I was wearing, you know, street apparel, and I can't even tell you how many years. And then the street apparel looked extremely ridiculous because it was like oversized, too big, some big old giant shorts on, a 3X t-shirt. Because I didn't really know what my real world, you know, clothing sizes were. So I just guesstimated. But I love that picture and I love that moment. And it's, you know, it began, you know, what's been an incredible 12-year journey of, you know, selling books. You know, it's I tell people all the time, not a day goes by that somebody doesn't send me a message, post a picture, tag me in a picture of them with one of my books, you know. And so it's been a long time going, man. I'm super proud of this part of my journey.
I think you should be super proud, man. I really do. And I think there's so much to unpack there. And I want to make sure the folks understand you didn't do a little bit of time, you didn't do easy time,
Yeah.
you did a long time.
Yeah, total of 19 years, 7 years in solitary confinement. I think I did 19 transfers to 11 different prisons. You know, I've been in every security level, from the highest security level in Michigan, which is level 5. Well, technically level 6 when you count solitary, on down to minimum security, which is where I went home from. And it was an arduous journey. It's one of the things I'm fortunate now. I don't have to talk as much about it. I just tell people to get the
Hmm.
book. They get all the nitty-gritty details. But one of the things that I know people love about these stories is like, these redemptive stories, or it was a model person going in and they just followed all the prison rules and found their path. And that just wasn't the case for me. I got in tons of trouble. I started off my prison sentence. I was angry, I was bitter, didn't want to be responsible or accountable. I didn't even know how to be responsible or accountable, because I didn't know what to be responsible for or accountable, or who to be accountable to. And so the journey started off with me getting in tons of trouble, but I was really fortunate that on that journey, I met some of the most incredible mentors in the world, men who were serving life sentences. They saw something redeemable in me. They encouraged me to kind of think about life differently. And I rebelled every step of the way,
Mm.
until they introduced me to the world of literature and writing and reading. It just transformed my life in a way that I don't think anything else would have. I know a lot of people are transformed spiritually or religiously, which, makes a lot of sense. And I definitely, studied different spiritual learnings, but it just wasn't enough to give me the hope that there was a world
Mm.
beyond where I was at. And for me, that showed up in the form of books. And, I've been on this transformative journey ever since.
Yeah, you've been righting your wrongs ever since.
Absolutely.
No,
Yeah.
man, I appreciate it. I love everything about it. Belief system. Some of the things that you probably skipped over. There's a point in that 19 years where you started to believe in yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a sentence that you have that I've seen you use often, and it says something to the effect of believe in the magic of who you are.
Absolutely. And that was probably the toughest part of my journey. And it's one of the things I even talk to people about now, is that you don't have to be physically in prison to be incarcerated,
Yes,
to
very
have your
important.
mind, to have your spirit, to have your heart imprisoned by the ideas that you're not worthy. And getting to a space of worthiness,
Mm.
for me, it started with journaling. And, I was journaling, I was in solitary confinement. And I had this moment where I got a letter from my oldest son, Jay, who's now 30. And, he just told me that his mom told him while I was in prison, and it was a crushing letter. And, what I did is I began to question myself. I was reading philosophy, and Socrates, said that unexamined life isn't worth living. So I began to examine my life. And I felt the best way for me to do that was to start journaling about what had transpired over the years in my life.
Mhm.
And upon that journey, I realized I just hadn't accomplished anything. I hadn't, you know, created any receipts for my time here on earth. And so as I began to write, I realized that I was incapable of loving the little kid that had been bruised and beaten and battered, at home and in the streets, and had dealt with so much trauma. Even now, when I talk to people about the different layers of traumatic events in my life, it blows their mind of how much one human being, could go through. And so on that journey, I began to piece by piece learn to love myself. And I started to affirm myself, and I would write down affirming thoughts, and whenever something negative would come up, I would challenge it. I began to meditate and practice mindfulness and being really present with myself and being really honest. And it's an ugly journey. It is a
Yes.
ugly journey.
Mm.
And the harder part is that journey is oftentimes we find it almost impossible to reassign responsibility for the hurts that we've experienced in life. And so what I realized is that for most of my life, I had created a narrative based on other people harming me. And that narrative saying that I'm not worthy, that I'm not lovable, that, good things don't come to someone like me. And so undoing all of that was really, really, difficult, and and I'm still unpacking it. I'm still undoing it. I
Yeah.
still have, self-defeating thoughts that pop up, out of nowhere. And I think that's important for people to understand on the journey. I
Yes.
don't think you ever get to a space when you've gone through what, we've gone through, to where those things don't pop up from time to time. What you
Hmm.
will get through is a space to where it's easier to challenge those self-defeating thoughts. And that's where I'm at in this journey now.
And I think that you've touched on that is super important. I think when people look at you, and they go, you've made it, right? You've got to have it all figured out right now. When you look at your Instagram, right? You've got a beautiful family, looks like Sekou's living his best life out there.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to go back, because when I look at some of your upbringing, the similarities of mine, you grew up and wanted to be a doctor. I grew up and wanted to be a dentist. You
Mm,
grew up, your parents' marriage fell apart at age 11. Mine was about that same time.
mm,
I grew up in a very abusive, physically abusive household with a dad that was just a notorious organized crime figure and a heroin addict. And
mm.
so guys like you and I have every reason to be on the Jerry Springer show tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's kind of cool about the narrative, if you want to call it that, is we've used those not as a crutch, but as an opportunity for greatness. And I think
Absolutely.
when
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, now we live in a culture where, people, especially around criminal justice, people are just like consistently, um, you know, taking people's trauma and monetizing it for
Mm,
themselves, and expecting that, since life looks good, that everything is over and done with. And as you mentioned, it's still fuel for, how I am as a father. When I think
yes.
about, my experience as a child, the way that I show up as a dad, you know, is rooted in what I went through as a kid, and
Mm,
realizing that I want Sekou to have a trauma-free life if possible. Like that's, my
yeah.
goal, and to be able to live and, with the freedom and the innocence and the joy of boyhood. I don't want him to have to think about being a man of the house at 12, at 13. I want to ensure that he's literally a boy for as long as possible. And, adversity definitely, if it doesn't break you, it gives you an opportunity to grow stronger. And every challenge I've faced in my life, there's lessons I've learned that I apply to how I show up in the world today. How I work, my work ethic, my ability to collaborate, my ability to, imagine tons of things. I think that's something that came from getting on punishment a lot, when you're left with just your imagination. So,
Hmm.
I'm curious about the world. When I would get in trouble and there was no TV, I would read the encyclopedia. So I know all these random things. But it also made me curious about the world. And I think curiosity is something that we don't talk about when it comes to, really living a fulfilled life, an expanded life. And, I do want to talk a little bit about the snapshots, because that's what I think of IG as,
Yep.
right? Or
Yep.
Instagram or
The
Facebook.
highlight reel.
Yeah, it's kind of like the highlight reel. And it's fascinating now because people think that is life, that we have it all figured out and that we have no worries. And I can't tell you how many people come to me and be like, hey, can you hand my book to Oprah? Because they think it's really that easy, right? Or,
No.
can you introduce me to Nas? Or, get his song to Nas. And I'm like, bro, first of all, the song is trash. So I'm not, I'm not
Real
giving
talk.
I'm not giving the song to one of the most incredible poets in the history. And it's not to say that people can't get better, because I'm sure when I started writing, it was trash. But I had to do the work, and
Yes.
I continue to do the work. I continue to read, and I'm right now. I'm reading about 3 different books, because I just want to be,
Yes.
the one of the best writers in history, not just one of the best writers who come from prison.
Yep.
And so I got to do the work, and all of that stuff is rooted in what I went through and what
Yep.
I've learned from those experiences.
You're right. And it's interesting, is sometimes I'm sure people ask you, right, for the shortcuts. But my answer, my real answer, and you probably can go deeper than this than I can, is you really don't want to know what drives me,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's,
right?
one of my favorite one of my favorite artists, Big Sean, you know, he has this line where he just says, like, I guess 10 years is an overnight success. You know, and
Mm,
so when people are asking me for the shortcuts, I'm like, my shortcut is 19 years of hell. You know, it's 7 years of solitary confinement. It's, you know, trial under fire in the most authentically hardcore way possible. And, you know, that driver to not be defeated by that experience, you know, it's something I would never want for anybody to go through. You know, even when I think of my path as a writer, I was just in a conversation the other day where I met Wallow, you know, from $1 million
okay.
worth of game. And when I met him, he was like, yeah, I know you, you're friends with Ben Horowitz, and you know,
Yep.
those people, you know, you connected with those people, and you know, they pour resources. I'm like, bro, that's not the narrative. You know,
Mm,
that's the perception. I'm like, Ben is literally like my brother, like I mean, like family. Like, you know, there's nothing transactional about that relationship. And what I realized in that moment was that people don't understand that when you show up, you know, fully authentically, you're going to magnetize to you people who are meant to be in your life. I wouldn't even known to look Ben Horowitz up. I wouldn't have known to go out and search for this person. Like, Ben found me, you know, through a conversation he had with Oprah. You know, the interesting thing about my experience with Oprah is I wrote it down when I was in prison that if I'm going to do this writing thing, that I need to set some goals. Like, what are my goals as a writer? And I literally just wrote down that I wanted to be a bestseller, New York Times specifically best-selling author. I wanted to meet Oprah, and I wanted to inspire young people who come from my community to read. And you know, it took me years to get to Oprah. Like that wasn't like a thing where, you know, I had a press release and I sent it out and Oprah was like, oh, this is a book I want to read. Um,
pop the trunk.
somebody, yeah, yeah, this woman, you know, this incredible woman named Andrea Wisham, who's now like really like she's like my sister. She was at a place where I spoke,
Mm,
and she got the book because I had them put it in the swag bag. It's like guerrilla style marketing, right?
yes, sir.
And I want to say this for the entrepreneurs, because like hustle is a real thing, and hustle is more than just selling product. It's being strategic in how you think about getting your product to market, right?
Yeah.
I got invited to speak in this room, and fortunately for me, they sent me a list of the guests.
Ooh.
I did not know 99% of those people on that list. But the two people that I do know did know who they were. I didn't know them at the time. Was George Lucas and Melody Hobson.
Mm,
And so everybody knows George Lucas from Star Wars fame. And then if you're into investing, you have to know Melody Hobson, Ariel Investments, one of the most incredible women in investing, and
mm-hmm.
then one of the first Black women to like be over billions of dollars in the portfolio. And so I knew her from reading Black Enterprise. I used to read her op-ed or her editorial, and I knew George Lucas from Star Wars. So I'm like, anybody else in this room has to be incredible. And so I told my partner at the time, I was like, you know, I want to send 100 books to this audience for free. And she was like, absolutely not. That's like, you know, $2,500 on the books. And at the time, I don't even think I had $250.
Mm,
But I was like, you know, you have to trust my instinct on this. Because what I knew is that after I got done talking, somebody in that room was going to read my book. And it just so happens that Andrea ended up reading the book, and she took the book and she gave it to Oprah. And Oprah got the book, and Oprah looked at the book cover. This was self-published. Looked at the book cover and was like, "Why would I read this book? This guy's on here with, you know, his tank top on, tattoos. He's convicted of murder. Why would I read that book?" And she said she took the book and she moved it to another section in her home, and she kept coming across it, and then she would move it to another section, and then she moved it to another section because she doesn't throw books away. And she said finally she was getting ready to fly from Chicago to LA. She was moving her offices, and she decided to open the book up. Got 50 pages in, it was like, I got to interview this guy.
mm,
And that's when she reached out to me, and her team reached out to me and invited me to her home, which was a crazy thing. Like, she didn't invite me to a studio. She didn't invite me to, some
Yeah.
random, hotel. She invited me to her home. And when I got to her home, I'll never forget the feeling of being interviewed by her and her holding the self-published version. That's what people don't know. Like, she had the self-published version.
Love it.
Um, and us diving into that interview, which was supposed to have been about 45 minutes, turned out to be 3.5,
Ooh.
hours. But that's hardcore guerrilla marketing. That's hustle is being strategic, being intentional, writing down your game plan,
Mm,
going after what you want unapologetically, and then executing like step by step. I had to follow through. I had to show up for that interview. I had to be my authentic self because I had wrote the book was so raw. It wasn't the polished book that's on the shelf. I mean, this was raw. This is like, my partner at the time, who was my ex, it's her editing. Like, she's not an editor. She just went to college and she was smart enough to know it's me editing, right? I didn't, come from an editorial background. I just know how to read and know how the stories should
mm,
flow. And so that mindset is like, when somebody come and ask me, yo, can you hand this book to Oprah? It's like, do you know how many years it took me to get there? I
yeah.
mean, the interview was in 2015. I started taking writing serious in 2000. You're talking about a 15-year journey. Um, and so it's not that I don't think it's important to, you know, be that bridge for people. I do, but the quality of the work has to be resonant in a way that somebody's like, hey, I think this is worthy of, like, I mean, like, when I wrote that goal down, my reason, my why was that, Oprah is the best reader. Like, she's the most well-read person in the
Yeah.
world. And
Yeah.
for me, it was very personal. My thing was, I didn't want to be boxed in as a good prison writer.
Mm,
And I say that because people, you know, they they don't always hold us to the same standards that they will hold
yeah.
somebody else. Just the fact that you're writing in that environment oftentimes is good enough.
Yes.
And I know the journey it took for me to become good. Like, I didn't start off good. I used way too many big words. You starting to, read the dictionary, and you want to
Yep.
pontificate and, elucidate everything that you're reading, right? And so I would
Look at
write
my
like that. Yeah.
vernacular.
Yeah, I want to flex this vocab, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I knew that if I was going to take this thing serious, I wanted to set the bar as high as possible,
Yeah.
and then I wanted to make the bar impossible. Like, it's
Mm,
impossible that I'm going to get to Oprah sitting in solitary confinement when I don't even
yeah.
know if I'm getting out of prison yet. Like, I don't think people really get like
Yep.
that level of drive, right? Like, I'm literally sitting in a prison cell in solitary confinement. They're telling me I'm never getting out of prison, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going to set the most ambitious, audacious, impossible goal. Because anything you catch on the way down from that, like, you're winning, right? But
All
I'm like,
day.
let me set the bar so high that
Yeah.
it's impossible to accomplish, and then go out and execute and accomplish it. And like, that's what I want entrepreneurs to really understand about hustle. Like, it's like, if you're a hustler, and I don't mean it with a negative connotation, because
Uh-uh.
people think hustle is like slick and and
Yeah.
and
Mm-mm.
and not authentic. To me, hustle is authentic. Like, you
Yeah.
believe in what you're doing to the point nothing is going to stop you from accomplishing that goal. Like, that's hustle to me. And so that's the way that I approached it, man. And it's still even
Love that.
surreal. I don't even talk about this part of the journey a lot with people, because I'm like, most people can't even comprehend that,
Uh-uh.
the depth of what it takes to get there, to have a mindset that you're so laser focused and so sharp, and you're willing to sacrifice. Like, I didn't have any money. That was a big gamble when you're trying to survive. And I think dreams are best made when you risk it all. Like, if you're
Yeah.
not willing to risk it all, maybe the dream isn't big enough.
I love that. It's so good. When my wife would come down on visitation on Saturdays and Sundays, and I would write it all down, like Life 2.0. And I now have people, they'll interview me, ask me, "Hey, did you ever think that you'd be in Forbes, and I look at them and go, yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Like my, I asked for this, I manifested this, I prayed to God for this. Like this is what I was built for. I was supposed
Absolutely.
to take the story to the world. So I love that. I love the depth of that perspective there. You've used the word, it's one of my favorite words, quite a few times. And I want the folks to really dive into this, and that's authenticity. I
Mm,
think we live in a filtered world, a facade world, a highlight reel world. We wake up with 7 filters and abs and no dishes in the sink. And I think it's all nonsense, brother.
yeah.
I think the real grit and the grime isn't really portrayed the way that it should be, the right way. And so you said something earlier that I want you to expound on. You said when you show up as your authentic self, you really kind of find your own tribe. You find those people that'll magnetize towards you. Tell the folks about that, please.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think we talk about it enough, right? And to your point, people see the highlight reel and they're like, "Oh my God, this is so easy, it's so amazing. I can be this." Authenticity is ugly, man. It's
Yes.
ugly. It's ugly to get to a space where you are completely raw and honest with yourself. You recognize your weaknesses, you recognize your strengths, you recognize your failures, you recognize your accomplishments, and you have to sit with it. Like you have to sit with your stuff, man. And people do not like to sit with it. But here's the thing about it, because I've sat with me in the most honest and raw way, what I've found is that what I've magnetized to me and the people I've magnetized to me is because who I am is liberating to them.
Yes.
It really gives people the permission to be all of who they themselves and want to be.
Yeah.
And there's nothing as beautiful as
Hmm.
showing up authentically, and it's tough. And there's nothing more revealing to how tough it is than being in a relationship and to building friendships and to being in a relationship with parenthood, because it's going to reveal your stuff to you.
Yeah.
It's going to force you to reconcile what you think you believe versus what you actually practice. And for me, I think, and I know that you'll get this, what prison does is prison strips you of everything. It strips you of your dignity. I mean, in the most physical way. Like when I tell people, how harsh it is, how brutal it is to be strip searched. The fact that somebody is asking you to look in your rectum, like there's nothing more debasing, dehumanizing, and raw than that, right? And if you can endure that rawness, that vulnerability, you know, to get to the stripping down of your soul,
Mm.
that process is so similar. You got to look at the rectum of your life, right? And it's ugly and it stinks and it's all the things that you don't want to pay attention to. You don't want to, talk about moments when you were vulnerable, moments when you didn't make wise decisions, moments when you were hurt and you couldn't say it, so you became angry. And for me, the way that I show up authentically, whether it's through my writing, whether it's through my posts, the thing about me is like my posts are just real. They're
Yeah.
real joy, they're real heartbreak, they're real, love. They're all the things because I've grown comfortable in being true to who I am, and recognizing like, man, people will leave you behind. I've been left behind. I've been abandoned. Like, for
Mm.
19 years, friends that I grew up with, like nobody reached out. I lost all my friends. My family didn't know how to quite support, with the exception of like my dad and my stepmom, and my siblings. They tried to do what they could and figure it out. But prison, you're alone, man.
Yeah.
You figure out that not as many people care about you as you think. Um, and you have
Very
to be
true.
okay with that. You have to get to a space where it's not about blaming them. It's not about tearing them down. It's about understanding that you were born into this world alone. You're going to die alone. And so if you're fortunate on your journey to meet people, to meet friends, to have family, cherish that, because this is it can be a lonely world. And it's those experiences that allowed me to say, you know, I'm going to accept all of who I am, you know, and even now, man, like it's, you know, I have moments where, you know, things are beautiful in some ways, and then they're not. You know,
Yeah,
they're ugly, and you know, whole day is wrecked because this thing happened, right?
yeah,
And it's tough stuff, you know, and it's tough to continue to fight for it, to fight for peace of mind, to be okay with who you are, and you know, as a dad, I'm always questioning, like, man, am I doing the
doing
right
enough.
thing? You know,
Yep,
as a partner, you know, I just got engaged in June.
yep.
I'm like, am I showing up the way my partner needs? You know, so those are the things I'm thinking about all the time.
I love it, brother. Where there's so many of your writings that people need to have access to. Where can people find all your books and get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, my books are available everywhere. You know, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your independent store. If they don't have me in an independent store, they should. But Righting My Wrongs, man, continues to perform well.
Yes,
6 years
my favorite.
later, you know, Letters to the Sons of Society isn't even a year old yet, and it's still showing up in the world. You know, I was actually, you know, talking about something recently, man. I've sold, you know, north of 100,000 books,
Jeez.
which, you know, as a writer, that's the equivalent of a music artist selling going platinum. You know, like the
Yep,
average book in its lifetime doesn't sell, you know, if you sell 5,000 books in a lifetime of a book, you've done good for yourself. You're a bestseller for the rest of your
yep.
life. So to be, you know, north of 100,000 books, man, is mind blowing at this point.
It's a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing. I've been touched, I've been inspired, and I hope the rest of the world has. I appreciate you so much, and hopefully we can have you back, continue the dialogue, continue the journey, and hopefully we can get some input from people that are out there that listen to this, and hopefully change their life.
Man, I'm truly honored, man, and the work you're doing is incredible, especially inspiring people on the inside, man. They need to see those of us who come from it. You know, we came through it, and you know, I hope it inspires them to reach for their goals, to perfect their craft, whatever that thing is. You know, I think I can't underscore that enough, man. Like whatever you
Yeah,
want to be, like, you know, you got to study that. You got to become a student of it, and remain in student mode, man. But thank you so much for the encouraging work, for the encouraging words, for continuing to push the envelope and expand, you know, the narrative and add new chapters to it. I think that's super important. And hats off to you, man, for a job well done and continue to do the work.
means the world to me, brother. I
Mhm.
appreciate you. We'll be in touch.
All right, look forward to it.